Good afternoon. At this afternoon's Intelligence Forum's Who Are You podcast, we're incredibly privileged to have Tim Hedley-Jones, the Executive Director of the Railway Heritage Trust. Tim, thank you very much indeed for agreeing to do this interview.
Thank you, Harry. Good luck to be here.
Sorry, I'm already talking over the top of you. That's a bad sign. But would you start by telling us about your professional journey so far?
Yes, of course. It's a delight to be here. Really great to talk to you, Harry. My career has been quite sort of one of different compartments. So the first part of my career, I spent 8 years working for the Foreign Office as a diplomat. And that included 3 years living in Russia, which was a very exciting time to be there. I then went back into the academic world and did an MA in archaeological heritage management. And since then, I've spent my career in the railway industry. I ended up as major projects director for the East Coast Train Company, involved in new train procurement and the management of stations, the redevelopment of stations. And then in the last 4 years, I've been director of the Railway Heritage Trust. So that brings together my academic interest in the past, in archaeology and history, but also my experience in the railway industry.
You're a professional railwayman, and I'm somebody with an interest. So when I say to you the North British Railway, the North Eastern Railway, the Great Northern Railway built the East Coast Main Line, when I travel on it, I just feel that the engineering is superb. I've studied it academically, but what's your perspective of this? Because it seems to go in a straight line. It doesn't seem to, it's magnificent. What do you view?
It is. It's a wonderful railway, and it's been a privilege to have worked on it for 20 years. And it does come together really well. But as you say, it was almost created by accident through the ambitions of a number of railway companies at the time of what was called the railway mania. I'm here in York, and York was the home of George Hudson, the railway king. Some of his business practices might have been somewhat suspect, but I don't think you can fault his ambition of wanting to make York the centre of the railways. And if you join that up with the ambition of the Great Northern Railway that wanted to take a railway from London to York, and then take that with the North Eastern Railway and its antecedents, which included the Stockton and Darlington Railway, then you're really creating something that is really quite a powerful piece of engineering, as you say. And when you look at it in a bit more detail, go down into the structures itself, then you come across wonderful things like the Royal Border Bridge at Berwick, which Queen Victoria travelled over many times. You get wonderful stations like York, Darlington, and Newcastle. Newcastle being one of only two Grade 1 listed stations in the whole of the north of England. So, these are very special places. But it's also worth reminding ourselves that this isn't just a Victorian legacy project. It's something which has kept pace with time. So if you look at the electrification of the East Coast Main Line in the late 1980s, then that was done one of the major electrification projects of the 20th century. It was done very much on budget and in time, and has lasted really, really well. Yes, there are still problems with the overhead lines, but broadly, it's a great railway delivering an electrified route from London to Edinburgh. One other piece of trivia about the East Coast Main Line, again dating from the 1980s, is that it's also Britain's first high-speed railway. The railway between Selby and York was reconstructed because of the development of the Selby coalfield. And when it was built to allow for 140 mile per hour running. So trains don't actually travel at that speed on it now, but it was built to that capacity and is Britain's first high-speed railway.
So, what is the history of the Railway Heritage Trust and what actually does it do?
Well, the trust was formed in 1985 um, at a time when British Rail, which then managed stations and infrastructure, was wanting to develop the railway, but quite often it did it by going around and demolishing some rather wonderful pieces of Victorian architecture. And stations like Newmarket and Derby Midland Station were demolished in the 1980s in the name of progress. Now, that obviously didn't go down well with heritage and architectural campaigners. They campaigned against British Rail for this sort of wanton destruction, wanton and unnecessary destruction. And British Rail, to their credit, came to the realization that they couldn't carry on just demolishing buildings because they felt like it. And so an accommodation was reached. It was agreed that a trust, the Railway Heritage Trust, would be set up. And this was very much done at the instigation and the hard work of Simon Jenkins, the author and journalist. Simon was one of the first non-executive directors of the Railway Heritage Trust, along with Marcus Binney, who had founded Save Britain's Heritage, the campaigning organisation. And then it was chaired by Sir William McAlpine, Bill McAlpine of the McAlpine construction firm. He undertook to chair it, and he did so for 18 years. Very much, larger than life character. He had his own train, so previous executive directors of the trust went around on the train, and what a wonderful way to travel. Unfortunately, I don't have my own personal train anymore, but that's progress for you. So the trust was formed. It was formed with two very clear objectives. The first was to provide grants for the restoration of listed railway structures and buildings that were either listed or in conservation areas, and secondly, to provide advice on the restoration of railway heritage. And those two objectives, we continue to do that today. That's our role. We work all across England, Wales, and Scotland. We work with train companies, with Network Rail itself, with local authorities, with charitable organisations, and with commercial organisations to help them in repurposing and restoring our historic railway heritage. And it really is a pleasure to do this job, because you come across some absolutely wonderful projects. As I say, I've been doing the job for 4 years, and it gives me a chance to travel around lots of parts of the UK rail network, which I was previously unfamiliar with. But it really does do a lot of good. And to quantify that, in our 41 years of being around, we've given grants worth £92 million, and we've awarded over 2,100 grants. So there have been lots and lots of places across the UK which have benefited from our grants. But quite often it's our advice that's important. And a lot of the time, if people are starting out on a project, they just need a bit of encouragement to help them, raise funds, to know what the right thing to do is, to how to engage with stakeholders, with Historic England, etc. So the railway is a complicated beast to do business with. It can be time consuming, but my message always is not to give up hope, that the end result is always worth it. And you can just see that traveling around the rail network.
I mean, in your time at the Railway Heritage Trust, do you have a particular project that's given you particular pleasure? And if so, why would that be?
Well, that's a very difficult one to answer, because there are so many projects which I've really enjoyed working with. I'll give you a couple, really, if I'm allowed more than
Yeah,
one.
no, absolutely.
um, So one of the ones that I think has been most satisfying has been the restoration of the former first class waiting room at Cleethorpes Station in Lincolnshire. So Cleethorpes Station is a Grade 2 listed station. It's right by the seafront. Cleethorpes was built by the railway. The town was built by the railway. So Edward Watkin, the renowned engineer, decided that he wanted to build a seaside resort to attract people on his trains to visit the seaside, and to enjoy the Lincolnshire sea air. And he built the station at Cleethorpes. There was a first class waiting room, and it's been in recent years a fish and chip shop. It's fallen upon a bit hard times. It had lots of corrosion because it's right next to the sea and the ironwork. The wood had rotten, and it was looking a bit down at heels. But the people who ran the fish and chip shop wanted to do it up. They wanted to do a great job with it. They had the support of North East Lincolnshire Council. We came on board as well, and we've given a couple of grants worth £155,000 to it. They've now completed that restoration. And one of the most satisfying things about this project was that they revealed a ceiling that had been hidden for decades. It had had a full ceiling put in. That was revealed. The Victorian original roof was revealed, and the skylight as well was reconstructed. So natural light comes in. They've done a very sensitive restoration of the woodwork and the ironwork. It's a wonderful place to go for fish and chips. So in this hot weather, if you fancy a trip to the seaside, my advice is go to Cleethorpes. And Cleethorpes, the whole link between railways and the seaside is a really powerful one. That poster of Skegness. Skegness is so bracing. The railways were very much at the forefront of building that link between summer holidays and the seaside. So Cleethorpes is one of my favourites, I think, for those reasons. But come back to another project which is at York, the York North Eastern Railway War Memorial, one of the finest war memorials in the country, designed by Sir Edwin Lutyens. Lots of people in York think it's the city war memorial because it is so monumental and imposing, but actually it was built for the employees of the North Eastern Railway who died in the First World War. We got involved with Network Rail, who own the war memorial, to help with a fundamental restoration of it, because it really does suffer from the elements. The stonework gets discoloured and dirty, and it was its 100th and the anniversary of its unveiling in 2023. So we got involved, and it was completed for that. The stonework is now shining and crisp. It's very much looking absolutely splendid in York. It very much contributes to the whole cityscape. And looking at war memorials by train companies, in many ways they were actually memorials for those train companies themselves. There's a sort of a hidden sort of story that in 1923 the Big Four was formed. The LNER came and took over the North Eastern Railway, and so in a way, this war memorial, which was very obviously for people who died in the First World War, was sort of subconsciously almost a sort of a validatory construction for the life of the North Eastern Railway as well. So war memorials, fascinating subjects, fascinating structures. The one in York is one of my favourites. And then, if I can come and just have a third one, which is one of my favourites, at Dalwhinnie in the Highlands of Scotland, a tiny little grant that we gave, only about £3,500, but it was for the restoration of the station clock, which had been hidden away. The face of the clock was covered in layers of paint. The local community wanted to see a station clock back there, so they got a clock restorer in. He put in a new mechanism. He took all the paint away. The clock is now on the outside of the station building. We had a little ceremony where lots of people in the local community came to unveil it. And Dalwhinnie Distillery, just down the road, gave a bottle of single malt to help everyone celebrate after we'd done the unveiling. So that for me, is the epitome of what our grants are for. It's about, helping communities get back in touch with their heritage, to understand the significance of their railway heritage, their stations, and then to celebrate it and to do the right thing for them. So I think those three projects sort of epitomised really what we do, and why our work is so exciting and interesting.
I'd just like to ask your thoughts. So, as you know, when you travel on a train going northwards on the East Coast Main Line, about 10 miles or so outside Peterborough, on the right-hand side, you have this lovely sign. It says Mallard 126, the world speed record for steam, being celebrated. But as a railwayman, what are your thoughts about that?
Well, I live in York, as I say, and Mallard is in the National Railway Museum. So it's wonderful that that object of power and achievement in engineering is still there. The Lineside sign itself is a great little sort of
Mm,
thing to notice, and in fact, it's not the only one. It was actually the whole of the East Coast Main Line has actually got lots and lots of these signs,
mm,
which were put up by the London North Eastern Railway, and effectively it was about customer service and marketing the railway. So there are other signs at Berwick for the Royal Border Bridge. There are ones telling you how far it is to
mm,
Doncaster and to Peterborough. And there are ones, at Dramocta Summit, the highest point of the Highland Main Line. Really, really, bleak place, but there's a sign there. So I'm a big fan of these signs. I think it shows, how in tune the big four were with marketing. The experience of not just the destination. We know all about the wonderful posters that the big four used, but about the journey itself. And I think we sometimes forget about, in our busy world of rushing around, we forget that traveling by train is actually can be an enjoyable experience. Yes, we all struggle from having a late train once in a while, but there are some wonderful, wonderful railway journeys that you can make in the UK. And for example, uh, the route from Newcastle to Carlisle along the Tyne Valley. You pass bits of Hadrian's Wall. You can see the Cheviots. The lovely Kielder Forest. It's a wonderful journey. To settle in Carlisle, saved from closure, is a great thing to do just as a railway journey. So I do like these line side signs, and the Railway Heritage Trust has helped to restore them over the years. Lots of them have been restored with grants from ourselves, and we're still putting them up. In last year, the year of Railway 200, celebrating 200 years of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, we gave a grant to produce some new signs which say "Route of the Stockton and Darlington Railway, 1825." And they're replicas of an existing sign that actually still stands by the East Coast Main Line at Darlington, but they've been put up in 5 other locations along the route of the Stockton and Darlington Railway at places like Hyington and Darlington North Road. And people can now, helps people to understand, well, where was the Stockton and Darlington Railway? It's a very easy way of engaging people with the history of the railway. So I'm a big fan of these signs. They're simple, they're easy to maintain, and they help people to engage with the railway.
Tim, with the rich heritage of railway architecture and history that you're dealing with, how do you prioritize? It must be very difficult to actually, you must get so many interesting stuff, so much interesting stuff across your desk. It must be quite difficult to sort of say, well, this one has to go ahead of that one. How do you do it?
Well, How do we do it? Well, we do. You're quite right. We do only have limited funds. We get our funding from Network Rail, for which we are very grateful, and they provide us with £2.5 million each year to reinvest in their historic assets. And we get some money from National Highways, their historical railways estate, for their assets. Um, but we don't actually have too much of a problem with how we allocate our funds. Generally, by the end of the year, we've allocated all our money, but projects that deal with railway heritage, they're not things that you can snap your finger and they're delivered. They take time to develop and gestate. If you're dealing with listed buildings, then you have obviously dealing with listed building consents, dealing with the all the approvals for the railway. Working on the railway can be complicated. Raising funding is another part of the challenge. So we try and make our bit easy in terms of people applying for grants, and we have a very simple process that focuses on the structure itself. But projects do take time to develop. So we work with people as early as possible. We understand when funding is likely to be needed, and we can be relatively flexible about how we pay our grants. So if, let's say, a charitable organisation has cash flow issues and needs to pay contractors at a particular point in time, then we can be quite upfront about it giving funds at that point. But then mostly we pay out our grants on completion of the work. So our assurance that the grant has been delivered is that we can physically stand at that station and look at the work that's been completed. So it's a relatively simple process, but we are able to prioritise, and we don't generally have a problem with spending our money, and we don't generally run out of funds, which is very nice to say. There are always more projects in the pipeline. There's always more work to be done, but we're there to help if people need it.
Well, Tim Hedley-Jones, Executive Director of the Railway Heritage Trust, it's been a great privilege to have you here today, and thank you so much for all the work you do to make, to me, what is the best form of transport in the world, an even better experience in the UK. So thank you for it.
Thank you.